to you and bring us up to date with what's going on in Syria, because it looks like a new, well, how do we describe it? A new campaign kicking off.
No. Yes, entirely a new campaign of destabilization. We've been talking very much about the north and the northeast, although we have drawn attention to Al-Tanf, the US illegal military base, one of the biggest, which is circled there on the borders with Jordan and Iraq. But today I'm going to talk about a new campaign concocted by British, French, American intelligence agencies to destabilize the south. The star there is the governorate of Sweden. Sweden is majority Druze population. Druze are an Abrahamic, monotheistic, ethnic religion that are in Syria, Israel, and Lebanon predominantly. And the largest population, I think, figures between 600,000 to 800,000 in Syria. The religion itself is not Islam-based. It's based on Christianity, Buddhism, Hinduism, Ishmaelism, and various other faiths and religions. But what we're seeing, and this, I just wanted to draw people's attention to this because I'm aware that a lot of people have not been following the Syria situation from the beginning. But in 2018, I covered an ISIS massacre, which was one of the worst during the 12 years of war against Syria in Sweden, in the eastern villages particularly, but in Sweden city itself, hundreds of civilians killed, majority women and children, by ISIS under the protection of the US military base at Al-Tanf. So that makes the following information even more unusual. So first of all, this is according to information that has been put out by leading media figures in Syria, based, I'm guessing, on Syrian intelligence information. And so I'm going to go through it. I've taken out the most important points, so not all of the points are included. So first of all, the claim is that there were meetings in Paris between French and British intelligence between May and July, and the head of the so-called Syrian Brigade Party, effectively a derivative of the Free Syrian Army, the original moderate so-called rebels inside Syria, based in the south. It is believed that Qatari funding, of course, Qatar refused to normalize with President Assad and Syria during the recent normalization with Saudi Arabia, UAE, etc. So they're funding this new movement with 30 million to move against the Syrian state. 200,000 apparently has already been given to the leadership of the brigade and the movement for autonomy in Sweden to provide water tanks, medical assistance, etc., to compensate for the Syrian government inability to provide all essential services due to many factions or many reasons, but of course predominantly to the sanctions that have been in place since the beginning of the war and have increased incrementally, to increase sectarian discourse and calls for autonomy. So in other words, a new federalist project, very similar to the Kurdish project in the northeast, also backed by the US, UK, and predominantly Israel, to establish border crossings for humanitarian aid, ostensibly. In fact, to import militants and weapons from Jordan that have been prepared prior to this new project. 16,000 Druze trainees at the Al-Tanf base, which we've talked about. 3,500 are ready and prepared to replace state security forces. So again, we see this style of shadow state manufacture. 7,500 terrorists that we've talked about on this program before from the Turkey-occupied territory in the north will, after training in Al-Tanf, will be deployed to the border with Jordan to control the crossings, just as Al-Qaeda or HTS control the crossings between Turkey and Idlib. Then, of course, there will be moves to achieve international recognition of the federalist movement from France, the UK, and the US, and to ask for international protection, which may well include a no-fly zone. French, UK, US intelligence will provide communication networks, logistics, surveillance technology, joint operations room for the movement to be established on the border with Jordan. So let's have a look at what's actually happening, and let's see if this horrible prophecy is being fulfilled. Unfortunately, it appears that it is. These are recent protests in Sweden city itself. You'll note the circle around balaclavaed armed militants. They could be from anywhere. The likelihood is that they are, if they are not Druze themselves, they will be, of course, the militants that were brought down from the north, or other Free Syrian Army derivatives that have been trained also in Al-Tanf, calling for autonomy. So we don't see here the Syrian flag. All these images that I'm going to show you, you will not see the Syrian national flag. So here is a call from autonomy. So already the prophecy, as I said, is being fulfilled. Moving on. This is a blog that's writing up the protests in Sweden itself. And of course, Sweden and Dada, Dada, of course, was the start of the Western orchestrated so-called revolution in 2011. And it's very close to Sweden. It's on the border also with Jordan, very close to Israel also. This blog is talking about negotiations between President Assad and the Druze in southern Syria have failed. Demonstrations expected tomorrow, I believe that's today, but let's have a look at this blog. So here it's saying that the anti-Assad sentiments are being shown not only within Sweda and Dara districts, but also beyond. So we'll come back to that. But clearly what they're trying to do here is to incite protests throughout Syria. Then moving on. So this is a blog written by something called the Abu Ali Express. But if you look where I've circled, you will see an Israeli flag. And of course, Israel has a huge investment in this movement of federalism. It has been backing, for example, the Men of Dignity movement, which was established in 2013 under the control of Walid Jumblat in Lebanon amongst the Lebanese Druze. And so therefore, Israel has a real vested interest in control of these southern districts of Syria. So here again, this is Megaphone News. The Syrian city of Sweda witnessed the largest anti-Assad protests since strikes and demonstrations. So we mentioned that they would be calling for strikes, that they would be cutting off services. I think that bit was actually missed off the bottom of the slide. But here we have a media channel, Sweda 24, reported that activists confirmed that the internet connection was weak. But here we have them also closing roads to prevent Russian forces from coming into the city after learning that the latter might come to bring food aid. So they're clearly trying to paralyze the governor in order for the various members of the movement to appear as the saviors, providing the essential resources for the people. The electricity also was cut off yesterday to the whole governorate and to parts of Dara. So this is an activist actually in Dara. So for the fifth consecutive day, we continue until the regime falls and Nazi Russia is expelled from our land. Glory to Great Syria. Well, interesting that Nazi Russia, that terminology is employed there, but we'll see why shortly if we move on. So this is a video of the actual Sweda protests, I think a couple of days ago, produced by the Sweda 24 media channel. Just roll that.
شباب كلنا بتعرفوا شو النظام، شو عم يشتغل النظام بالمحافظة. الكل بيعرف شو النظام، شو عم يشتغل. بده يعمل فتة بين الطائف والعرب. الشعب السوري واحد. الشعب السوري واحد. الشعب السوري واحد. الشعب السوري واحد.
Just a quick comment on that. What he's actually saying is that we are one people, Syrians are one people, and yet I will repeat, there are no women in these protests. There are no Syrian Arab Republic flags. There are only the Druze flags and Free Syrian Army flags, so the former French colonialist flag. So former terrorists are actually mingling with these Sweda protesters. And also interesting, all of the videos are zoomed in, which is exactly what they did in 2011. we now have some zoomed out video footage which shows that the protests are relatively small. So exactly the same kind of theatrics that we saw back in 2011. But the main channel that is producing information at the moment is this one, Sueda 24, based in Sueda itself. Let's have a look at who they are. You will remember that I did a report on the BBC Captagon documentary where it's claiming that President Assad personally and his family is creating a narco state in Syria. That was also collaborated on by various media channels in Syria, including Sueda 24. And let's see, of course, the opposition are now picking up from that BBC documentary, claiming that Assad has turned Syria into a narco state, becoming Pablo Escobar of the Middle East through Captagon. So clearly the BBC rushed through that documentary in preparation, one can assume, for this movement. So here we have an article. I just want to show how this works. So you have Sueda media on the ground, citizen journalists and so on, just like in 2011, producing the images and the narratives, picked up by AP, Associated Press, and Reuters. Residents in southern Syria raid ruling party offices, block road as protests over economy intensify. And then let's see who then picks it up. So Times of Israel picks up exactly the same story from AP, and Sueda 24 provided the photos and the story. So very familiar pattern here. Ronan Al-Tainan was a very prominent Western activist for regime change inside Syria. I've had many arguments with him. But let's have a look at who he is tagging in this tweet. BBC Breaking, Sky News Break, Martin Chuloff of The Guardian, Peter Tatchell, Bianca Jagger, Clarissa Ward of CNN. And of course, he's basically taking the narratives back to 2011 and the alleged peaceful protests. Then moving on, here you have, he's called Free Syrian Army Soldier. He's talking and he shows a video of the burning of President Assad's picture in Sueda itself. But if you look on the right, I've circled there, one, he supports Ronan Tainan's project trying to criminalize President Assad. But he is, of course, Slava Ukraini. He's a supporter of Ukraine. So this shows quite clearly how this movement is tying into US operations, not only inside Syria. Here you have Haid, Senior Consulting Associate Fellow for Chatham House. And he's claiming that following demonstrations in Dara, Sueda, and briefly in Jaramana, I think that is, protests have now broken out in Aleppo, specifically in Al-Fidus, Al-Sukri, and Salah al-Din. This is an outright lie. I have had evidence from friends of mine in Aleppo that no such demonstrations are taking place. We know that videos of protests against Giuliani on the Turkish border have been used to try and portray protests in central Syria. I do have to say that the majority of people in Syria, despite suffering severe economic hardship because of the sanctions, because of 12 years war, are quite well aware of what is going on and are pushing back hard against this recent attempt to basically divide them along sectarian lines. But let's have a look at what the various EU allies are talking about. So the UK, the Syrian regime and its allies continue to profit whilst the Syrian people in the region suffer the consequences. UK statement at the Security Council. Again, he takes it back to Resolution 2254, political interference in Syrian affairs, and he reiterates the same narratives from 2011. Moving on, we also have the German special envoy to Syria, also drawing attention to Resolution 2254 and the fact that there should be a transitional governance. In other words, we're back to regime change narratives, although a little softer perhaps than 2011, but profiting from the movement and the protests in southern Syria. Also, at the time that the alleged intelligence meetings were going on in Paris, there was an inaugural meeting of an organization called Madaniya, which brings, again, all of the opposition figures under one umbrella, including Raed Salah, who's on the director's board. Next slide, Mike. Raed Saleh is the leader of the White Helmets, so we see them re-emerge once more within this organization that, as I said, had its inauguration just as the plans were being put in motion for this new southern movement. And then look who's behind Madania, none other than Ayman Asfari, funder of hundreds of thousands to the Tory government from Cameron through to May. I don't have any recent figures on him, but also instrumental. He's a British Syrian, a British resident Syrian oil baron, the CEO of Petrofac. He had oil interests in Syria. And here he is basically setting up this so-called opposition umbrella organization in Paris in June, just as these plans were being finalized. So Syria, while I just wanted to say, Biden is losing the war in Ukraine. Syria now has, a friend of mine pointed out, about 14 months of Biden trying to gain what he perceives as an easy victory in Syria while he's losing in Ukraine. So Syria now is facing basically US aggression in the northeast to close all borders with Iraq and Iran, and now this new incubated movement in the south, which benefits, of course, Israel, the US, the UK, and the EU.
I mean, I think that my first thought on this, and maybe this is overly harsh, but it's maybe a little disappointing that Syrian people on the ground don't recognize the same pattern coming along again. Is that unfair?
It's not unfair. The thing is that those that are protesting and that are taking part in this movement are, I would still say and hope, the minority in Sweden. Of course, the fear is that that minority has the backing of both Al-Tanf US military base, of Israel, and of the terrorist militants that are not inconsiderate in number, that are moved down to that region. And the majority that may be with the Syrian state and understand what is going on are now at risk of assassination, liquidation, kidnapping, etc. So it's a complex situation, Mike. I would say that the majority of the Syrian people in what I call kind of central Syria are very aware of the situation and are definitely pushing back against it. But, the West is an expert at exploiting sectarian differences and hardship that they've imposed upon these people.
Yes. Okay. Thank you very much. Any
more to be discussed, but we could do that in extra time, Vanessa.
Absolutely. Okay.
Yeah.